Okay, hi everyone. Um, to we're going to get started this week, getting into our next text, Persepolis, um, by Marjane. Oh man, and then I always mess up her last name. Marjane Satrapi. I'm pretty sure is how it's pronounced. Satrapi. Um, it is a graphic novel. Um, so on day one of this week. So basically, each week we've got 2 days that are supposed to be um, for instruction, and then like a work day or whatever. So this week on day one, you need to do chapters 1 through 5 in the book, 1 through 5, and then on day two, you're going to do 6 through, where are we going here? 6 through 12. All right, 6 through 12, and then that'll put us on chapter 12 by the end of the week. So by the end of the week, you should be through chapter 12. And your first group of questions will be on 1 through 5, and your next ones will be on 6 through 12. That may seem like a lot, but it's really not, because this is a graphic novel. It reads really fast. Like, here's a whole chapter. Like, this is a whole chapter, and that's it, and then it's done. So, like, a chapter is maybe 5 minutes worth of reading. Uh, um, they do not take very long, so please don't stress out and feel like I'm asking you to read some terrible amount or like whatever. I read through the chapters that you're supposed to read this week, and it took me less than an hour. Now, sorry, I was choking there. Okay, I've already read the work, so I didn't need to be as attentive while going through it as you might need to be. So it might take you a little bit longer, but it's not a super hard work to read. It's not super challenging. I am going to give you guys some assistance with some things here. I've got here. Let me see if I can open them real quick. Um, let's see. I've got some vocab guidance that I'm going to put in the folder for you that covers any kind of words that maybe are non-common, especially in kind of our vernacular for each section. And then I've got a page that I will throw up as well on. Where is it at here? Oh my gosh. Oh, I don't know where I put it. Oh wait, no, here it is. And then I've got a page that I'm going to throw up on understanding a graphic novel. Kind of the first part is just kind of a glossary of words, things that we will, words that you may hear me use whenever I talk about the like graphic novel, so that way we all understand where we're at. So like that way, if I talk about a panel or an elongated panel versus a regular panel, or if I talk about the way that a page is like arranged, or a regular grid versus like an offset grid, you will kind of know what those things mean. And then we've got a couple of comics here. One illustrates the way that comics relay information, and then the second is the difference between a comic book and a graphic novel, which is an important distinction, more than you might think. So those will be up in the folder too. Those are just resources. You're not going to necessarily be assessed over any of those things, although there will be an assessment at some point later on that is going to ask you to interpret the use of like images, and how those images are used to convey meanings. So you might want to make sure that you're comfortable talking about that. So let's talk about Persepolis here. Make sure I'm actually, yeah. All right, so make sure I'm not covering up anything important over here on the screen with my face. I moved myself last time, so there we go. Let me move myself down just a little bit more, and I'll shrink myself here, because while I'm beautiful to look at, I'm not the most important thing here. There we go. All right, so Persepolis. This is going to be kind of, so I'm trying to accomplish two things with this presentation here. I'm going to try and give you an introduction to the work itself and some key themes to like read on. We're going to go more in depth in those as we kind of go through the work a bit more. But also, I'm going to try and give you the historical context necessary to understand this work. This is an autobiographical work. about a girl who was growing up during the Islamic Revolution, but you kind of have to understand the historical context of that for it to really resonate or even kind of make sense a little bit. So, yeah, so here's kind of where we're going with this. General disclaimer, all right? Cultures, countries, religions are all very, very complex, very, very multifaceted, and are very, very dependent on perspective for how individuals feel about and relate to them. We have to be very careful that we do not take a single individual's perspective as the gospel truth, but rather as their truth. All right. The goal of this presentation is to help you understand what the characters in Persepolis are talking about and how they feel, not try to be overly reductionist, explain away the reality of that time and that place. It is not to take any kind of specific perspective on the rightness or wrongness of any action or anything else. Nor will our discussion of the book be trying to take on any kind of moral qualifier of what is right or wrong or good or bad, but rather just simply seeking to understand. I talked about in our introduction to the 9 weeks about Stephen Covey and those 7 habits of highly effective people, and again, only 2 of those that I think are worth anything: sharpening the saw, and then seek first to understand. Always seek understanding. So we are trying to understand here, not make judgments about. All right. So first, let's talk broadly about how we talk about the world. And typically, we talk about the world in kind of dichotomous ways. We talk about the developed world versus the underdeveloped world. We talk about really, in America, we talk about the North versus the South, and whenever we talk about geopolitics, we often talk about the East versus the West. And the reason why is that you're talking about different cultural developments and how those cultural developments happen. So when we talk about the West, we're talking about countries that were really influenced by ancient Greece and the ancient Roman Empire. And when we talk about the East, we're talking predominantly about nations that were not. They were more influenced by the Babylonian Empire, the Persian Empire, the Mongol invasion, and the Chinese Empire. And when we talk about the East, we actually even further subdivide it to the Far East, which is really China, Japan, Thailand, Vietnam, the Koreas, and then to the Middle East, where we talk about Iran, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Afghanistan, Pakistan, so on, and then so forth. And really, the Himalayan mountains are usually seen as kind of the divider. The Himalayan mountains in the Gobi Desert. So when we talk about the Middle East, we are fundamentally usually talking about this area right over here, starting in Turkey, which borders, you'll notice Turkey borders Europe. All right, Turkey is right over here, borders Europe, and then you get Turkey, Syria, Iraq, Egypt, Israel is over here, Lebanon is over here, Saudi Arabia, Yemen, Oman, Iran, the United Arab Emirates are in here, and then usually we also throw in Afghanistan and Pakistan in our discussions of the Middle East as well, and that's because of the influence of the Persian Empire, which is so heavy in Afghanistan and Pakistan over here. Sometimes that discussion will cover these other stands, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, but oftentimes, usually not. We typically don't even talk about these places a whole lot. We just kind of leave them to their own devices often. But usually, our discussions of the Middle East happen in kind of this circle here. All right. So the West refers to Europe, North and South America, especially countries like Britain, Germany, France, the United States, Australia, these countries that are heavily influenced by the Roman Empire, and really by Christianity, and that have spread those Christian influences around the world. So there was this idea back in the Victorian period. I'm sure you guys have heard of it. If not, we have failed you. Imperialism. And so imperialism was all about taking your country and spreading it out and taking over other places. And so, like, Great Britain, which is this little place right here. Great Britain ends up taking over Canada, a big chunk of North America. They've got South Africa. They had some other colonies in Africa. Australia and New Zealand are also Great Britain. For a long time. They ran India and parts of China, and so this one little island had this vast empire. And what happens is that vast empire then spreads its culture to those places that it has made its imperial colonies. All right, and again, I'm not interested in getting into a moralistic debate about the rightness or the wrongness of that. Um, I'm just trying to help you understand the ways that we talk about the world and the ways that these cultures have developed. But imperialism is important to understand because it plays a major influence, especially in the development of the Middle East in the 20th century. Um, so we use the terms East and West. These terms have been common for many centuries, for a very long time, as a way of understanding the world, going back to Marco Polo and the Silk Road, which was the first trade route between the East and the West. And it's a convenient way to group up cultures. All right, because basically you've got the Judeo-Christian values over here, and then you've got kind of the rest of the world over here. A good chunk of that is the Islamic world, and then you've got the Orthodox up north in like Russia, and then you've got the Far East, which has a bunch of different influences, and I don't even have time to go into that. They're often used as stereotypes, obviously. Anytime that you try to be reductionist with a people or a culture or a society for the sake of ease of understanding or like communication, it ends up being overly reductionist and ends up becoming stereotypical, and that can have all kinds of negative ramifications as well. So it's an important thing to try to avoid. Marjane Satrapi has always gone out of her way to try and tear down the barriers because, as you'll see in the novel, she was born and raised in Iran, but then she moves to like Europe, and she believes that there are more commonalities between the East and the West than what we typically as like members of the world really understand because we have such limited interaction. She has this great quote, and I'll read it to you, then we're going to move on. But the world is not divided between East and West. You are American, I am Iranian. We don't know each other, but we talk and we understand each other perfectly. The difference between you and your government is much bigger than the difference between you and me. And the difference between me and my government is much bigger than the difference between me and you. And our governments are very much the same. Um, and her idea here is that while cultures may be different, humanity is often universal, and that we often get caught up in these cultural differences, um, and 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 we lose sight of the common humanity. And so one of the reasons why she wrote her book was to kind of build a bridge between Eastern and Western cultures because she felt like she herself was a bridge. All right. So let's talk a little bit about Iran. So in order to understand Persepolis, you really kind of have to understand Iran as a place and a little bit of its recent history. Um, Iran looks like this. Tehran is the current capital of Iran right now. But down here is the ancient city of Persepolis. And Persepolis was the capital of the Persian Empire. Iran which is what we call the country now, used to be the seat of the Persian Empire, which was founded by Cyrus the Great, 500 BC, so 500 years before the Common Era. So it should actually be BCE, but anyways, at the time, it was the largest empire in history. Obviously, becomes supplanted later by a couple of other ones. It was a very advanced and accomplished civilization, like very advanced. In fact, a lot of our understanding of the modern world comes out of ancient Islamic culture. So, like algebra is from ancient Islamic culture. Our number system, our like integers, are from ancient Islamic culture. A good, and so sometimes we overlook those because we are considered a Western country, and a lot of our understanding and our teaching of history is what we call Eurocentric, focused on Europe and the development of like Europe, and then the development of the colonies that came out of Europe. But what that does is it fails to really inform us of all the other things that have come, like for instance batteries. The first salt sodium batteries came out of the ancient Islamic world. They found these old jars that they had been using. So, anyways, all of that. Alexander the Great conquers the Persian Empire in 330 BC, and then later it breaks off again, but it becomes the Babylonians, and it's a whole thing. Anyways, so here's what the Persian Empire looked like. All right, so over here is Macedonia, and then Sparta's down here in Athens, and this is Greece. All right, this is what we would now call Turkey. All right, Syria's down here, Egypt is over here, Babylon was over here, and Iraq and Iran are over here right now. And then over here is Saudi Arabia and all those other countries, right? So this was the Persian Empire, and you can see this is a unifying cultural influence, right? This is one culture that influenced all of these places. So, Persepolis, where the book gets its name, was the capital of the Persian Empire. It was founded by Cyrus the Great, and it is often used to refer to the greatness of a past Iran, whenever Iran ruled a large chunk of the world. The Persian Empire was, it's really hard to understate how important the Persian Empire was at that time period. It was the trade capital of the world. It was the thought capital of the world. It was vast. Here's what Persepolis looks like today. These are some of the relief art. This is the Persepolis capital. All right. So then Islam develops. Islam is the second largest religion in the world. Just over a billion believers, so just over a seventh of the world in total practice Islam. People who believe in Islam are called Muslims. Muslims believe God, who they call Allah in Arabic, spoke to the Prophet Muhammad in a cave so that he could write the Quran, and they believe that Muhammad was the last prophet. They worship the same God as the other Abrahamic religions. Islam is considered to be an Abrahamic religion, along with Judaism and Christianity. The major difference is that in Islam, they believe that Jesus was not the Messiah, but just another prophet of God, and then Muhammad was the last prophet. And Muslims believe that a pure life, according to the 5 pillars of Islam, is the path to heaven. We're not going to get into the 5 pillars of Islam or Islamic beliefs and the difference between Shia and Shiite. If you want to get into any of that stuff or what Sufi looks like, I encourage you to explore that and to really get into the nuances there. But it's just not necessary for understanding this text, and it would probably overcomplicate things. So, in order to understand Persepolis, you've got to understand what happened to Iran in the 20th century. So, the 20th century for Iran was a time of turmoil, revolution, outside influence. Most of the world's superpowers, Great Britain, the United States, France, the Soviet Union, have used Iran in some form, and really the Middle East as a whole, in some form or another to suit their own needs. So I'm going to try and give you a brief rundown of the last 70 years, all right? And I'm going to try and go through it quickly because I know that this is not a history class, but you do need to have some kind of context here, okay? So basically, where are we at here? Yeah. All right, hold on. There we go. All right, so 1941, the Shah, which is just another word for the ruler, all right, Reza Khan Pahlavi, is forced out of the country by British and Soviet forces because of his support for the Axis powers in World War II. All right, so basically, Iran sides with Germany, Italy, and Japan during World War II. When they lose, when the Axis powers lose World War II, they force out the ruler of Iran, and they let Mohammad Reza Pahlavi become the Shah of Iran. So while Shah Mohammad Reza Khan is the ruler of Iran, the Allied powers set up a new government system that would place a lot of the power of ruling the nations in the hands of the prime minister, who was Mohammad Mossadegh. And Mohammad Mossadegh was kind of a puppet for the Western influences. So Mossadegh was known as a nationalist, or somebody who believes in the a nationalist is somebody who believes in the autonomy of their nation and wants to focus on their nation and is not interested in playing nice with the rest of the world. All right. So as a result of this belief, Mossadegh nationalizes the oil industry of Iran. So basically, after World War II, British Petroleum, also which you know as BP, comes in and starts drilling for like oil over there, as do several other companies. And it is a very, very profitable thing for them. And they are giving some money to the Iranian government, but they are also taking out a lot of the oil. So Mossadegh comes in and he basically kicks out all of the British companies and nationalizes all of the oil production in the nation, so that way the profits of the companies, or sorry, so that way the profits of the oil stay in the country. They don't leave. Obviously, the Brits don't like this because now they're losing a ton of money, so they start to throw support behind the Shah to give the Shah more power again instead of Mossadegh, so that way they can run out Mossadegh, hopefully, and then they can get their British oil companies back in there again. After Mossadegh nationalizes the Iranian oil, the British impose an embargo on Japan. An embargo means that nobody is allowed to trade with them, and they send ships to the Persian Gulf to try and enforce a blockade, meaning that they were not going to let Iran ship any of their oil outside of the country to make money with it. This basically devastates the Iranian economy because all of their money was coming from their oil industry. So what happens is basically they kick out the British oil companies. The British say, okay, well then we're not going to let you actually sell this oil to like anybody else, decimating the economy. And so when this happens, the Shah then makes a move, tries to grab power away from Mossadegh, but fails, and then he is forced to flee the country. So then British and American intelligence services, like the CIA, decide that they're going to organize to overthrow Mossadegh and return the Shah to power. And they successfully do this. They organize a coup, basically. They overthrow Mossadegh. They reinstate the Shah to power. And then the Shah basically tries to turn Iran into a secular nation. They implement a bunch of reforms called the White Revolution that give women the right to vote. They give land reforms that allow peasants to buy land where they weren't able to before. They open up access to like healthcare. They institute new educational reforms. They invest in the university system. They go really, really hard into a literacy approach to try and hit a 100% literacy rate. And they offer free schooling to all students from kindergarten to like 14, and they are able to accomplish a lot of this with funding from the Western world as well. So basically, when the Shah comes into power, the West then supports the Shah with money in exchange for being able to put their oil companies back in again. Um, but and so several good things happened because of this, right? But there were some unintended consequences. So one is it doubled the classes of people who were most opposed to the Shah. So the intellectuals and the urban working class. So the original people who resisted the Shah and who liked the prime minister, right, were basically the middle class and the intellectuals. And what the reforms did was it actually expanded the intellectuals and the urban working class. But because that culture was already there to oppose the Shah ends up increasing the number of people that oppose him. Money becomes very, very concentrated in the hands of the few because of the privatizing of the oil industry. Again, it causes a concentration of wealth. And this then inspires Ayatollah Khamenei, all right, and several other Islamic religious leaders to organize a counter revolution. And basically, the idea was, oh, look at the Shah. He's trying to turn us into like a Western nation. He's trying to let the West come in and rule us and rob us of our like culture. He is taking all of our like money and all of our like resources and shipping it. And like shipping them out, and so then there was this counter revolution. So, so they started denouncing the white revolution, and so then the Shah has Khamenei arrested, and this leads to widespread riots and protests, and then the Shah doubles down, and so at first he releases him, but then he has him exiled from the like company, and this like all of this just feeds into this building resistance. All right, this is what the Ayatollah looks like. All right, and he's exiled from Iran from 1964 until 1979, and so on one hand, you've got the people that already don't like the Shah because they supported what the former prime minister was doing, because what he was doing was in line with a lot of kind of the Marxist revolutionaries that were happening around the world at the same time, which was the seizing of the means of production by the state for the people and getting rid of private industry. So all of those people that were in support of that kind of opposed the Shah, and then on the other hand, you've got these the support of the Ayatollah and the very religious who now also oppose the Shah, and so they combine, right, to like create this like growing swell of discontent against the Shah. So the Shah then, instead of listening to the people, trying to unite and find a path forward, begins to use his secret police to kind of stamp out opposition. He starts arresting people, murdering people, so on and then so forth. And this causes an even greater reaction from the people that oppose the Shah. The Shah is becoming increasingly what we call authoritarian, which is ruling with an iron fist. And then in the process of that, there are more riots and more unrest until eventually the Shah declares martial law, suspends all like regular laws, and basically say the military is running the like country right now. And then that leads us to the Islamic Revolution of 1979. So revolutionaries present a 17-point resolution, basically declaring that the Ayatollah is the supreme leader of Iran, and the people take to the street, and in the process of this, the Shah loses control of the military, so then the Shah flees Iran, um, and then the Alatoya returns. And then since then, the Alatoya has been running Iran, and the Islamic Republic of Iran is proclaimed following a referendum, and the Islamic Republic of Iran implements Sharia law. Um, and the Islamic Revolution reforms implement a lot of changes, which are in a large part what the novel that we're about to read deals with. Some of the good ones are the expansion of education to all Iranians. Um, they do end up using schools as basically Islamic education centers, where all of the schools are based around a religious education, and they get rid of secularism, and they get rid of the complete influence of America and Britain in the nation. They do increase their literacy rate. They do see an improvement in the infant mortality rate. And they implement something that's called Sharia. And Sharia law is basically whenever you run a government based on the Islamic rules laid out in the Quran. So you take the rules that kind of support those five pillars of like Islam, and you turn them into a governmental system built around those rules, and those end up becoming Sharia. And when the author in the novel refers to fundamentalists, she is referring to Muslims who want to make Sharia the official law of Iran and move away from any kind of secularism. Now, where this becomes a conflict is that the West is almost the exact opposite. The West heavily resists what we call theocracy. Theocracy is where you run your government based on religious belief. And the West believes in a secular state, which is a state which is run by a system of rules and laws that are divorced from or are not driven by religious reasons. All right, Jefferson said that erecting the wall of separation between church and state is absolutely essential in a free society. So you can already see how these two ideas are now conflicting with each other, right? Right? This idea of secularism from the Western world and then theocracy and Sharia law from the Middle East do not coincide very well. So, themes to keep a lookout for as you begin to read this novel. All right. First is the class system. All right. In the novel, you will notice that there is a big distinction between the wealthy and the impoverished. And that oftentimes coincides with the educated versus the uneducated. While Iran has made great lengths to try and increase educational access. The time that the novel is like taking place, education was still basically only for the wealthy, and it leads to this concentration of wealth because the only people that are able to do the things that make money are the people who are from wealthy families already because they were able to get an education. Obviously, this is also a coming-of-age story because it is about growing up during the Iranian Revolution, and so the same things that you see in all coming-of-age stories. Establishing a like individual identity versus the way that your family thinks about you, establishing your identity in society, trying to figure out who you are as a person, dealing with trauma and how you process that. All of these things are also present here. One of the things that I'm interested in exploring over the next little bit is how different this coming of age story is with something like Ocean at the End of the Lane. The restrictive government, the freedom to choose beliefs, access to like information, and how that government is so different than the Western government that she will go to later, and the differences between those two governments. And then the idea of marginalization or being an outsider, being somebody who doesn't fit into the group. And this is another one of those universal themes that I think that we can definitely talk about. So yeah, that is basically the majority of what you need to understand going into Persepolis. Again, this week, The first group of questions is going to deal with chapters 1 through 5, which is the veil through the letter, and then the next questions will deal with the party through the F14s, which is chapters 6 through 12. This book can be read with the Calibri ebook reader as well if you want. You can also probably convert it to a PDF and read it as a PDF if you want to, because it's basically just a series of like images. Again, I like Calibri because it allows you to use the table of contents, so on and then so forth. You can also zoom in to these pages here. I don't know where my zoom is. But yeah. So Calibri works. Obviously, there are other things that you can use to read it as well. If you're having any struggles with getting the ebook to work, please let me know. I will go out of my way to assist you. There will be a writing assignment probably later this week as well. But for right now, we're just going to focus on the questions and actually getting the reading done. And as always, if you have any questions, if you need anything, let me know. I'm always happy to help you. Yeah, and right at 35 minutes, so perfect. So hope this was informative. Hope you learned something about Iran. Then get to that reading this week, answer the questions that are there, post them in the assignments. Don't forget to answer the weekly discussion, and that'll be it. Have a good one.